What if the very forces that you think are leading you to progress are actually driving humanity and yourself towards some catastrophic end that has destroyed every other advanced civilization before us? Well, we've been exploring the cosmic depths of Gurdjieff's masterpiece, Beelzebub's Tales to His Grandson, and today let's examine encounter 3 chapters that reveal the devastating patterns underlying human history. Now, these teachings expose how civilizations rise and fall, how spiritual wisdom becomes corrupted, and why humanity repeatedly makes the same tragic mistakes across millennia as related in Beelzebub's Tales chapters 19 through 21. I'm Mark Roach. Welcome back to Transcendent. Now, the 19th teaching, the pattern of civilizational collapse, takes us into the aftermath of the greatest catastrophe in human history, the destruction of Atlantis. Beelzebub returns to Earth only 11 centuries after his first descent to find the continent, which had been the largest landmass and the chief center of human civilization. This continent has been completely destroyed, along with most all of its knowledge and achievements accumulated over countless previous centuries. This wasn't just a geological event, it represents the loss of humanity's highest potential for normal 3-brained development. The survivors? Well, they were scattered across newly formed land masses, representing a dramatic regression in human consciousness and the beginning of our current phase of civilization, characterized by increasing mechanization and mutual destruction. But here's the crucial revelation. The destruction of Atlantis was connected to cosmic processes that humans had disrupted. The archangel Loisos informs Beelzebub that the newly formed moon requires ongoing maintenance through specific cosmic processes, and that human behavior is directly interfering with these processes. Individual human actions affect cosmic harmony, making every person's development relevant to universal stability. Think about what this means for our current moment. We live in a time when human activity is disrupting planetary systems on a scale comparable to what destroyed Atlantis. Climate change, environmental destruction, and the potential for nuclear catastrophe all reflect the same pattern: advanced technological capability coupled with consciousness that hasn't evolved to handle such power responsibly. The Atlantis pattern repeats constantly throughout history. Civilizations develop sophisticated technologies and accumulate tremendous power, but fail to develop the wisdom necessary to use that power harmoniously. The inevitable result is a catastrophic collapse, followed by long periods of recovery during which most previous achievements are lost. Modern research validates this cyclical pattern. Archaeological evidence suggests that advanced civilizations have risen and fallen multiple times throughout human history. Each collapse erases most technological and cultural achievements, forcing subsequent generations to rediscover what was previously known. We might be living through the final stages of such a cycle right now. Now, the key insight is that technological advancement without corresponding psychological and spiritual development leads inevitably to destruction. External power without inner wisdom creates conditions for catastrophe. We see this pattern playing out in artificial intelligence development, genetic engineering, and nuclear proliferation, all advancing far faster than our collective wisdom about how to use these capabilities safely. The survivors of Atlantis carried forward crystallized consequences of the Kunda buffer organ that made them prone to the same psychological errors that destroyed their predecessors. This explains why each civilization tends to repeat the mistakes of previous ones rather than learning from the historical patterns. The 20th teaching, the corruption of compassionate action. Chapter 20 reveals Beelzebub's mission to end the terrifying custom of animal sacrifice among early human civilizations. This chapter provides profound insights into how compassionate intentions can become corrupted and how social reform efforts often produce unintended consequences that are worse than the original problems. Beelzebub's motivation stems from genuine concern for the suffering of other beings. He witnesses humans engaging in what they consider divine work by destroying the existence of beings from other brain systems, animals, as offerings to their gods. The practice combines spiritual delusion with systemic violence justified through religious belief. His approach demonstrates sophisticated understanding of social change methodology. Rather than confronting the practice early or directly, he works through existing religious and social structures. He influences key individuals who then spread new ideas through their natural authority and influence. He presents new concepts in ways that appeal to existing values and motivations rather than imposing foreign beliefs. The historical context he describes, the civilization of Marl PC, founded by Atlantis survivors, shows how even beneficial customs can become corrupted over time. What began as genuine spiritual practice gradually transformed into mechanical ritual that had lost connection to its original purpose. But here's where the teaching becomes disturbing. Beelzebub's well-intentioned intervention, while successful in ending animal sacrifice, had consequences he didn't anticipate. By spreading the idea that all beings contain sacred essence, he inadvertently contributed to the spiritual confusion that would plague humanity for centuries afterward. This reveals a crucial principle about social interventions. Even the most compassionate and skillfully executed reforms can have unintended consequences that create new problems. The complexity of human psychological and social systems makes it impossible to predict all the ramifications of any significant change. Modern examples of this pattern abound. Environmental movements that successfully ban certain practices sometimes create ecological problems they didn't anticipate. Social justice. These initiatives that achieve their stated goals sometimes generate new forms of division and conflict. Medical interventions that solve specific health problems sometimes create other health issues. Educational reforms that address particular deficiencies sometimes undermine other aspects of learning. The deeper issue is that most social problems arise from psychological dysfunction rather than external circumstances. Changing external conditions without addressing underlying consciousness often simply moves the problem to a different location or transforms it to a different manifestation. Animal sacrifice in ancient times served the same psychological function that various forms of ritualized violence serves today. Sports that celebrate physical domination, entertainment that glorifies conflict, political discourse that demonizes opponents, and economic systems that reward exploitation all represent modern forms of the same underlying pattern, using the suffering of others to generate psychological satisfaction for ourselves. The 21st teaching, the inevitable distortion of sacred wisdom. Chapter 21 presents Beelzebub's encounter with early Buddhist teachings and how his observations of how authentic spiritual wisdom becomes corrupted through human misunderstanding. This chapter is crucial for for understanding why genuine spiritual development remains so rare despite the widespread development and availability of spiritual teachings. Beelzebub arrives in India during a period when authentic spiritual transmission was still available. He witnessed both the original teaching and its subsequent deterioration, allowing him, Beelzebub, to document the specific mechanisms through which sacred wisdom becomes distorted beyond recognition. The original Buddhist teaching emphasized the rarity of authentic spiritual transmission, the inevitability of distortion through human misunderstanding, the crucial role of those who receive and transmit teachings, and the importance of living embodiment rather than intellectual comprehension. But within a relatively short period, these teachings underwent systemic corruption through several predictable mechanisms. Literalization transformed symbolic and metaphorical teachings into literal facts. Ritualization converted living practices into fixed ceremonies performed without understanding. Institutionalization turned spiritual movements into social organizations focused on external power rather than inner development. Commercialization made sacred teachings into commodities for personal advantage. The psychological factors driving this distortion are universal human tendencies, like the need for certainty leads some people to prefer fixed doctrines to the uncertainty inherent in genuine spiritual work. The desire for specialness makes spiritual teachings into ways of establishing superiority over others. The avoidance of effort causes mechanical practice to replace the conscious effort required for real development. The fear of responsibility makes ritualistic compliance a substitute for personal responsibility demanded by authentic teaching. This pattern repeats with every authentic spiritual teaching that appears in human history. The original transmission, no matter how pure or how powerful, inevitably becomes corrupted through these psychological mechanisms. What begins as liberation becomes another form of imprisonment. What starts as wisdom becomes another variety of ignorance. Modern spiritual culture demonstrates these patterns perfectly. Mindfulness meditation has been transformed from a demanding practice of self-observation into a relaxation technique for stress management. Non-dual awareness teachings have become positive thinking philosophies. Compassion practices have turned into niceness training. Surrender teachings have become manifestation techniques. The marketplace of spiritual ideas has become a battlefield of competing egos, with teachers and students alike using spiritual concepts to reinforce rather than dissolve the very patterns the original teachings were designed to address. Spiritual materialism, using spiritual practices to enhance rather than transcend ego identification, has become the norm rather than the exception. Bringing it all together, the cosmic crisis of our time. These 3 chapters reveal the complete pattern underlying human history and our current predicament. Chapter 19 shows how technological advancement without psychological development leads to civilizational collapse. Chapter 20 demonstrates how even well-intentioned reforms can have unintended consequences when they don't address underlying consciousness. Chapter 21 reveals why spiritual teachings, no matter how authentic originally, inevitably become corrupted through human psychological limitations. Together, they diagnose our current moment as potentially the final phase of a cycle that has repeated throughout human history. We possess unprecedented technological power, artificial intelligence, genetic engineering, nuclear weapons, global communication networks. But our collective consciousness remains dominated by the same Kunda buffer consequences that have destroyed every previous advanced civilization. The environmental crisis reflects the psychological crisis. Climate change, ecological destruction, and the potential for civilizational collapse all stem from the same source. Humans using sophisticated tools to serve unconscious psychological patterns rather than genuine wisdom. The corruption of spiritual teachings means that even our attempts to develop higher consciousness often become new forms of unconsciousness. The very practices designed to free us from ego identification becomes a way of reinforcing ego patterns. The teachings meant to develop genuine compassion become methods for feeling superior to others who haven't had access to the same information. But understanding these patterns provides hope. If we can recognize the mechanisms through which consciousness becomes corrupted, we might be able to work against them consciously rather than being driven by them mechanically. This requires what Gurdjieff called conscious suffering, the willingness to see the uncomfortable truth about our situation without immediately trying to fix or escape from it. It means recognizing that our current civilization is likely in the final stages of the same cycle that destroyed Atlantis, and most of our attempts to solve problems through external means are likely to fail. It means understanding that authentic spiritual development requires sustained conscious effort rather than comfortable beliefs, and that genuine compassion manifests in practical actions that reduce suffering rather than pleasant feelings about ourselves. Most importantly, it means recognizing that individual consciousness and cosmic harmony are interconnected. Your personal development isn't separate from the larger evolutionary process. Your capacity to remain conscious in the face of unconscious forces contributes to the possibility that humans or humanity might break free from the repetitive cycle of rise and fall that has characterized our history. The question isn't whether you can single-handedly save civilization. The question is whether you're willing to participate consciously in whatever process is trying to emerge through human consciousness, even if that process involves the death of familiar forms and the birth of something unprecedented. The cosmic forces that destroyed Atlantis are at work again in our time, but the same cosmic intelligence that sent Beelzebub to help humanity is also available now for those willing to do the real work of conscious development. The choice, as always, is individual, but the consequences are collective and cosmic. Are you ready to recognize the patterns that have trapped humanity for millennia? Are you prepared to work against the psychological mechanisms that corrupt both technological power and spiritual wisdom? Can you embrace your cosmic responsibility while accepting that the outcome is beyond your control? The future of consciousness itself may depend on how many people are willing to choose the difficult path of genuine awakening over the comfortable illusions that have led to repeated catastrophe throughout human history. I'm Mark Roach, wishing you all the best.